Hey AP Lang students, this is Kevin from Fiveable, and I'm glad you're here today. We're going to be working on rhetorical analysis. We're going to be working on rhetorical analysis today, and we're going to be working on it all throughout October. So every single Tuesday, we'll be here at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, really walking through what most people say is the most difficult essay. So by the end of this month, we're going to take the next few weeks to really walk through it. I hope that you feel like this is a very doable process. So today, what we're going to talk about is reading with an analytical mind. What I mean by that is don't worry about today what we're going to be writing in terms of the actual essay. We're just thinking like critical thinkers and people who are analyzing a text. So we're going to do that today, and we're going to translate quickly through this month by the end with how do we translate high-level thinking into writing. So by the end of the month, I'll have for you like sample paragraphs that really set a high bar, and just some tips and tricks to like how to really make sure we're effective here. So I have taught AP Lang for I guess since about 7 years now, and I've been an AP reader for several. 2 of the years that I've been an AP reader, I've graded rhetorical analysis. So throughout this month, I will definitely be giving you tips of like from an insider's perspective, someone who's graded the essays, what are we looking for in terms of like, if we read 1,000 essays on the same topic, what generally rises to the top, and what kind of does a normal average essay look like, and what essays are not getting the job done. So I'll kind of be sharing with you some tips and tricks on how to sound better than average, right? And definitely avoiding like that lower half of rhetorical analysis papers. So let's just jump right in talking about rhetorical analysis. Today, I really encourage you to, if you ever have a question, just pop it in with a question. I'll try to get to it at the end of the session here today. All right, so again, we'll be here every Tuesday, and I wanted to let you know the next 2. So next Tuesday, we will dedicate a good chunk of time to look at some model thesis statements. So we'll look at some different prompts, some different rhetorical analysis passages, and what is a perfect thesis statement? What should a thesis statement look like in a rhetorical analysis essay? The week after that, not even worrying about writing yet. We're just looking at a prompt and saying, okay, out of all the strategies that I see, out of all the things that this writer is doing, how do I know what's worth my time? If I only have 40 minutes for this rhetorical analysis essay, how do I know how I should best spend my time? What's worth talking about? And I'll give you a quick heads up on that. We'll dive in really a lot more deeply in a couple weeks. But if I see it just one time in a paper, if I just randomly see a metaphor, it's probably not worth talking about. I'm looking for trends, and I'm looking for things that are really deliberately done to get the audience on the side of the speaker or the writer. Now, the first live session that we did this year with AP Language was all about the rhetorical triangle and the rhetorical situation. So if you haven't seen that one, go back and watch our first free live session. But let's look at it again today, just very briefly, and then we'll launch into looking at an AP level text and how am I going to think through it as I'm reading with an analytical mind. So the rhetorical triangle is all about how these 3 key components of every argument work together and are interrelated. So obviously every argument has a speaker. For our purposes, it's like literally a speaker of a speech or the writer of an essay. So the speaker is the one writing the words that we are reading. They have a relationship with the subject. It's what they're talking about. That's easy to identify. Now, what I wanted us to push is the audience side. The audience has a relationship with the speaker. They either know the speaker or not, and they already kind of come into the text agreeing with the speaker or not. But really, for the rhetorical analytical essay, what's going to get us out of the lower half is really focusing on this side of the rhetorical triangle. What does the audience already think about the subject? And how is the speaker changing their mind or reinforcing an idea about the subject? It's really, really important. So before I even read a word, I'm already going to be thinking with an analytical mind. What might the audience think about the subject? Of course, I need to just quickly recognize the audience. If it's written in the 1960s, you and I are not the audience. We were not around in the 1960s. If it's in 2012, maybe, right? Then we got to think about what country or what like target demographic is the audience. So all of these things matter. So we'll walk through a practice round today. But just to hit this home, what matters the most with rhetorical analytical writing, think about what the audience already believes about the subject, and then you're going to be writing and thinking about how does the speaker change the audience's mind or reinforce their beliefs. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at Ronald Reagan's address to the nation on January 28, 1986, regarding the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. So this is really short, quick text. We'll be able to walk through the whole text today. What I'll do is I'll read, and I've retyped on the PowerPoint, Reagan's words. So we'll look at the entire speech today. And then every paragraph, or even like sentence or two, I'll just walk through. This is what I'm thinking as an advanced reader. So this is all things that I'm thinking of as I'm reading. This is before I even pick up my pencil to write my essay. Now, of course, I might be annotating kind of in bullet points what writing choices he's making, what choices he's making as a writer to, again, get his audience to change their mindset or to reinforce what they already believe if it's what he wants them to believe. So he wants them at the end of his speech to be on his side. So the first thing we have to do is identify his purpose. And then the big task here, how does he achieve his purpose? That's really all this is. This is not as complicated as a lot of students think it is. So by the end of October, you should feel a lot better about rhetorical analysis if you're starting to feel like, okay, this is the hardest essay. My teacher has looked at it with me a little bit. I've seen some prompts. It's tough. Or if you're like, okay, I kind of get it, but I need some help. This month is a really crucial month. And again, I'm going to say this a lot. AP language is not one test that we can successfully cram for. So sure, come May, I'll be going over review and all of that through Fiveable. But the best way to go through this course is every week deliberately practicing. All right, so before I even read a word, I'm thinking about the text. So I know Ronald Reagan's addressing the nation. So this is an American audience. If you were not born in 1986, you are not the audience here. If you were not in America in 1986, this still relates to you, but you're not the immediate audience, right? So if you're in Europe in 1986, you might be interested in Ronald Reagan's speech. You probably know about the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion because that was international news for sure. But he's addressing America. All right, so let's keep all of that in mind. So the first thing that I'm thinking is the nation, the American public, is in mourning because they watched the explosion live. So that's some background knowledge here. The more background knowledge I have in the topic, the better off I'm going to be. Now, you all have a lot of good background knowledge. It doesn't matter if you're in AP US or if you take an AP World or not. You have enough background knowledge, I like to argue. Obviously, if you're in some advanced AP classes in terms of history and psychology, even like the world around us, you're going to have more background knowledge. But the reality is everyone's going to have different levels of background knowledge. Take whatever you can to your advantage, but you're not in trouble. You're not like, oh crap, I don't really know much about the explosion, so I'm done. Just know what you know. So I do know, okay, most of us know this, that astronauts were American heroes, even more than they were today. Back in the 80s, we're kind of off the conclusion of the space race here. The Cold War is kind of at a close. But astronauts were American heroes for a couple decades here. They're the cream of the crop. That's how we viewed astronauts. They're America's best. So I know that's what the nation's thinking. Hey, they just watched 7 astronauts die. So obviously they're going to be in mourning, like I just said. And lastly, I know this. President Reagan knows what we just said. They're in mourning, and they're also looking for reassurance. They're like, okay, we're processing a lot of emotions today. This was like a terrible day for our country. What is our president going to say? So President Reagan knows he has the American public at the edge of their seat. How is this president going to respond to this national tragedy? I'm thinking all of these things just by looking at the title and the background info that's provided. So all I provided here was the date. And I'm already launching into who's the audience and what's going on with the work at the time. So pretty clearly on this one, this is the day of the Challenger explosion. So it's really fresh. The tragedy is really fresh in the American public's mind. All right, so we're going to walk through this. Again, if you have questions, pop them in and I'll get to them at the end. And we'll make sure we come full circle here. So what I'm going to do today is look at Reagan's speech on the left and then my analytical thinking as I'm reading on the right. Again, my analytical thoughts are all about, hey, how is he communicating effectively with his audience? And why is he doing the things that he's doing as a writer? So let's read Reagan's speech first. So this is just the first couple sentences. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd planned to speak to you tonight to report on the state of the Union, but the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering. So we're going to get there by the end of this like little mini unit of analysis. But the best thinkers here, the best analyzers, think about why does Reagan deliberately start how he starts, shift to where he goes, and then end how he ends. Every effective writer is really careful of, okay, who's my audience and how should I start? What do they kind of need to hear to ultimately get on my side here? So with that in mind, he emphasizes the magnitude of the day's events. He knows everyone is kind of like taken aback by what happened. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. You might know this, but schools were having watch parties. They had projectors and like students were in classrooms, were in their cafeterias, and they're all watching this great American achievement. They're supposed to watch one of the best days in America, like of the decade, of the year for sure. In fact, it was the opposite of what happened though. So Reagan's saying, okay, I know what happened, guys. We were ready for like an amazing day for our country and for these astronauts. And the worst possible thing happened. He meets the audience where they are. He can't launch into anything other than to say, hey, today is a day for mourning and remembering. I know everyone at home who's watching is mourning. I'm recognizing the need to mourn. So he deliberately starts there. If he jumped in really anywhere else, the audience would kind of be like, wait a minute, we're mourning here. Don't you recognize us? All right, so then he shifts. Let's keep reading. Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. So he shifts here to talk about his wife, Nancy. He goes quickly to the personal. He brings in the human element because he realizes he's not in front of a lot of people. He's in front of a camera that's televising this to the country. People are watching this with their families. So he's saying, hey, we're all in this together. I'm just as terrified as you are. He ends this section with, this is truly a national loss. Let's make sure we all are on the same page. He brings in the human element because he's like, I had to process with my wife what all you husbands and wives had to process with each other. He definitely wants to come across here as a family man. We're all processing this as a nation, but we're doing it individually in our families. So again, he's really connecting himself to his audience here. He knows, hey, if I just start coming from a place of I'm the president and I know what's best, the audience isn't going to be ready to listen. So every analytical thought that I have, I'm thinking as I read every single text this year, how would the audience respond? Why would this author do this for his precise or her precise audience? So he emphasizes that he is in pain just like they are. We have this in common. We're all coming from the same place. Reagan wants them to realize I'm processing through this just like you all are. All right, so the next part he goes, 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. Now let's just pull back for a minute. Can you imagine if Reagan had started his speech like this? It would not be as effective, right? He needed to start where he started the last 2 slides. We're all in this together, y'all. We're mourning. This is a terrible, terrible day. Once he said that, he can kind of move on to what else he wants to say. But he had to say that first to get the audience like ready to listen. If they didn't hear, this is a day of tragedy, this is a day of loss, we're all mourning, they really wouldn't be able to like think like this. He's making a connection here with prior tragedy, but he's really highlighting the uniqueness of this tragedy. Again, we have never lost an astronaut in flight. So as an audience member, I'm like, yeah, that just proves to me this is a terrible, terrible day in American history. We've never had anything in the like space field that was quite this tragic or quite this unique, at least. All right, then Reagan continues. He says, and perhaps We've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle. But they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. So quick, we just read the slide. He kind of broadens it out and puts it in perspective. Then he quickly goes back on this slide to let's talk about the events of the day. Let's talk about the Challenger 7. That's the people who died that day, the 7 astronauts. So he describes the astronauts as courageous heroes. Now, as I'm thinking through this as a rhetorical analyzer, critical thinker, I'm thinking, how would the audience respond? Okay, of course, they're like, wait a minute. Are you talking why are you talking about these other 3 astronauts? These are the people I'm thinking about today, the 7. So he doesn't stray from them for long. I think that's very intentional. Also, he's just reinforcing what they already know here. Remember, at the very beginning, we said astronauts were considered American heroes. He's just reminding us what we already know. We're mourning. We didn't just lose 7 Americans. We lost 7 American heroes. They were courageous. Let's not forget that. All right, and then he continues. We mourn 7 heroes. And then he goes ahead and names all 7 of them. He actually reads them all out. So you can see on the left, that's what it's looking like. And then he ends the section saying, we mourn their loss as a nation together. We mourn their loss as a nation together. Now, here's what I'm thinking. Why take the time to do these, to spell out, or at least say, all 7 astronauts' names? I think he's encouraging the audience to slow down. He's reading everyone's name, he's just letting everyone process. This is who died. They are real people with real families. He's emphasizing the personal nature of this tragedy. If he just had 7 heroes, 7 heroes, 7 heroes, well, guys, heroes seems like unattainable. That seems unrelatable. And he wants here, by slowing down, for that to be the opposite. While they are unattainable because they're America's best, like they don't have a lot in common with me, the everyman, they do have a lot in common with me, the everyman. So there's kind of a tension there. They're heroes, but they're everyday men and women. So he encourages his audience to slow down and recognize they're probably fathers, mothers, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters. They're people just like us. That just makes the tragedy even greater. The audience, he gives them a chance to breathe. He gives them a chance to realize, okay, as an audience member, I'm still feeling the need to mourn. So he's allowing them to mourn. He's allowing them to just make connections with these astronauts who died. Once he does that, he says, directly to the families here, for the families of the 7, we cannot bear as you do the full impact of this tragedy, but we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. So once he names them and once he starts to encourage the audience to make personal connections, he talks directly to the families. I think he does that on behalf of everyone watching and listening to him. Everyone's at home. Like, there's so many people in America watching this speech. Again, this is a day they will never forget. And they're just, as they're mourning, they're like, I wish there was something I can do. You all know, whenever you go through mourning, you're like, I wish there was more that I could have done or can do in the moment. I wish there's more that I could do. The reality is that the people at home really don't have much they can do other than just kind of comfort themselves. They're like, I wish I could do something for these heroes and the hero's family. Well, there's not much that they can do, but he kind of takes on the pronoun we. Not just me as your president, he's saying, but us as a nation. We cannot bear the full impact of what you're going through. You just lost someone who's like so important to your life. Acting as a hero, they died. He's speaking directly to the families on behalf of everyone at home who's watching. They can't. I think they're kind of grateful. They feel like, okay, we can't do anything, but he's kind of doing something for us. He's talking directly to the families. We don't have that platform. Real quick before I move on, I think that word we is super intentional here. A lot of times, the best analytical essays simply talk about shifts in pronouns. So keep that in mind. The word you, we, I, your, these are all very deliberate things authors do to either juxtapose different segments of the audience, contrast different segments of the audience, or align themselves with their audience. So just think about that as we continue. So as we continue, Reagan says, your loved ones were daring and brave. He's still talking directly to the families of those who lost loved ones. And they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge and I'll meet it with joy. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. So again, really looking at the use of pronouns here. He starts this section with your, talking directly to the families. Then he shifts to they, talking specifically about the astronauts. And he ends with us. They served all of us. Me as the president, Ronald Reagan the speaker, and everyone who's listening. So the audience is a part of this right now. He's still talking to the direct family members of those who died, but not just as president, as an American. He is speaking on behalf of every American who is listening. Now, some more analytical thoughts here. He acknowledges that, okay, the mission failed. It's not the astronauts' fault. It was a tragedy. But even though the mission failed, the astronauts succeeded in their service to their country. He's kind of going back. He's not straying too far from this. He might slip some other things in here in a minute, but he knows the audience really just needs to keep being reminded and reinforced, okay, we're just in mourning because we lost some great American heroes. So by saying, yeah, they served us well, they served all of us, that's just reinforcing to the audience these astronauts were American heroes, and it's just a complete tragedy what happened today. Now, this is a shift here in the most advanced thinkers. Guys, first you think at a college level, and then you translate it into writing. So the most advanced thinkers are just looking for shifts in writing. I think that Ronald Reagan, like all good authors, shifts intentionally. He says all of this stuff that we just looked at before this shift. But this is something he had to say. He just had to figure out, okay, how am I going to effectively incorporate it here? So let's read how he shifts. We've grown used to wonders in this century. Remember, this is the 1900s. It's hard to dazzle us. But for 25 years, the United States space program has been doing just that. It's been dazzling us. So he shifts to discussing the successes of the U.S. space program as a whole. This is 1986. There are a lot of people in the audience at home, in their living rooms, watching him on television, who 2 decades earlier watched the moon landing in that exact same living room. It's a little bit different for you and I in 2018. We're thinking about that's history. This kind of the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's history. That's a little bit more removed from where we are. He's talking to people about the space exploration program who've, most of them, seen it firsthand. They've lived through it. They lived through the tension of the Cold War. They lived through the tension of the arms race and the space race. That's really important to remember. So he's talking to them, hey, we're used to this. Everyone just think about this. We've been through 2 world wars in the 1900s. It's 1986 when he's giving this speech. We've grown used to wonders in the century. Think back to 1899, 1900. How far has society in America come since 1900, my bad, to 1986? That is exactly what he wants us thinking about. Now, obviously, there's a variety of ages here. There's people in their 80s listening to Ronald Reagan. They're processing this very similarly to people in their 30s, in their 20s, even the kids. Now, the children haven't, again, we talked about this today. They watched in school. Their teachers were getting them in assemblies and saying, let's go watch this great product of American, ingenuity. They're processing this too, of course. They just don't have as much of that living through the space race to latch onto. So Reagan recognizes that. He's not talking too specifically because he knows his audience is pretty wide in terms of age. but it's an American audience, and most people who are listening, all of them, for one thing, know about the space race. We're not that far removed from it. Know about the moon landings, of course, but a lot of them lived through it firsthand. Now, let's remember, guys, this is what he's saying. For 25 years, we've been dazzling, but let's not forget, like in perspective, how amazing the things we're doing, how amazing these things are. Only for 25 years have we been able to do these amazing things. Most of history, getting to the moon, leaving this planet, is like science fiction, right? Now he's like, we're actually able to do it. It's pretty dazzling. So he's shifting here. Let's see where he goes. Look at the first couple words here. We've grown used to, and this next section, we've grown used to. So this is deliberate repetition. Let's read. We've grown used to the idea of space, and perhaps we forget that we've only just begun. We're still pioneers. They, the members of the Challenger crew, were pioneers. So a couple things here. First, again, you'll see this today. He's going to say some things that he really wants to get out, that he's taking this opportunity, this platform where everyone's like wanting to listen to him, to say some things about space exploration. He's starting this shift here. But remember, he's not getting too far from the Challenger crew. So I'm not today worried about what body paragraphs we're going to write. I'm not worried today about like how am I writing a thesis. That's next week. But I'm just thinking at a very high level. Starting next week, we translate our college level thoughts to college level writing. But I'm just paying attention to these things. He is never getting too far away from the Challenger crew. If he goes off too far, he's going to lose his audience. Like, hey, we're here because we're mourning. So he's going to say some things that are beyond and broader than the Challenger explosion. But he's kind of yo-yoing, like he's kind of, I guess, chained, not in a bad way, but like he's always pulling back to the Challenger explosion of the day. But let's look a little bit more to this. Just like I talked about in the previous slide, he's putting the last 25 years of space exploration in context. Think about it. 25 years in the grand history of the world is a sliver. It's barely anything. So he's saying we're just getting started here. Don't forget that. We've come a long way. But think about how far we can go. That's what he wants his audience to start thinking about. Yeah, you're right. It's only been 25 years. Of course, someone who's 45 at the time, that's going to feel like a lot. But he's saying, don't think about it in terms of your lifespan. Think about it in terms of the world. This is just getting started. He reminds the audience that there is a lot left to explore in space. Now, with that in mind, and not getting too far from the Challenger crew, this is where he goes next. He says, and I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. Okay, so side note, he knows, like all the parents know and all the kids know who are at home watching him. So many schools in America like didn't shut down, like just stopped class as usual to watch again what was supposed to be a very successful like day of celebration. He's talking directly to school children here. He says, I know it is hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery. So two things. I think he is deliberately talking to school children here. But I don't think he pauses and says, everyone just pause, stop listening to me. I'm just going to talk to your kids. He definitely is talking to school children, I think, for a few reasons. One, as a parent, I am so grateful for this man at this moment who takes time out of his national address to talk to my kid. My kid is probably, if they're school age, processing something that they've never had to process before. A lot of children at this age haven't even lost a relative. Like a lot of school children at this age haven't even been to a funeral. And obviously, guys, some have. So a lot of school children have understand and went through the mourning process. They've never been through a national tragedy quite like this. So I want you to really think about, he's talking to them because he realizes this is unique. So many school children were not ready for this, obviously, just like all Americans, but have never gone through this. Now, a lot of the adults have gone through national tragedy. We're not too far removed from some major assassinations. The assassination of Martin Luther King, for example. from Robert Kennedy, for example, from JFK, for example. So a lot of people who have been through this tragedy were alive and like very much still like adults, so like knowing a lot about the world around them, politically and otherwise, during those very tragic national assassinations. But I guess this is even a little bit different than that, because these are not big political figures, not controversial figures. They're American heroes. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. In 1986, my hero just died. 7 of my heroes just died. So he's talking directly to school children here, A, because he feels the need to. I really believe that. But B, it's comforting to the parents to know he's taking care and he's talking to their children. That isn't really advanced thinker. I'm thinking something beyond that. He's directly addressing the school children, but he's actually still talking to everyone. By addressing school children, it's allowing him to say something to the parents, the grandparents in the audience that doesn't insult them. Think about if he took out that school children sentence and then just said, hey, everybody, I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process. That would come across it would fall short, wouldn't it? It would feel pretty patronizing. Who are you, Ronald Reagan, to tell me, like, trust the process, bad things happen? But by kind of veiling it in the lens of let me talk to the school children, he's able to remind it to everybody. Trust the process. Bad, terrible things happen. They're unavoidable. They're still tragic. Think about if he would have started here. People would be like pretty angry. What do you mean trust the process? We're mourning. But he kind of took some pains and like some very dedicated time to say, I'm mourning with you. We're all in this together. So let's keep the broader picture in perspective. All right. This is kind of going right off of where we just were talking about. He says, it's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them. Remember, there's some tension here. Even though he's talking to school children, the audience might be like, hey, where are you headed, Mr. Reagan? They want to talk about the Challenger crew. He never goes too far away from them. He slips in what he wants to say, and he goes back to the Challenger crew. That's the whole point of this speech. That's why he has an audience. So again, keep it in perspective, he says. There's going to be risk if we want to go places as a society, as a country. He's emphasizing the importance of pursuing space exploration, even in the face of tragedy. He's recognizing this in his audience. Oh man, we just lost we just terribly lost 7 national heroes. Maybe this whole space thing is maybe overrated. Like, I know they're heroes, but is it worth the risk? That's what his audience is thinking, at least some of his audience, right? So he's reinforcing what all of his audience knows. These are heroes. This was a tragedy. We need to mourn for them. He has reinforced that a lot. But he wants to get everyone on his side by the end of the speech. We need to continue to pursue space exploration. Maybe a lot of his audience is already thinking that. Of course, we're going to continue. Maybe a lot of his audience is saying, let's rethink this. We can't lose national heroes like this again. We don't want to. It's not worth the risk. He's saying, okay, this was a tragedy. I take nothing away from that, but we must go forward. Let's keep reading. I've always had great faith in and respect for our space program, and what happened today does nothing to diminish it. We don't hide our space program. We don't keep secrets and cover things up. We do it all up front and in public. That's the way freedom is, and we wouldn't change it for a minute. Pronouns, we. I sound French here, but we. He's aligning himself with his audience. He's saying, hey, you're on my side. You've been on my side this whole time. We are on the same page. We celebrate what we've done. We mourn the tragedy that happened, but none of that stops the goal. There's probably some tension here. The use of we is helping alleviate some of that tension. We're all on the same side, he keeps reminding his audience. And then he uses one of the biggest buzzwords in American history, freedom. He does that intentionally, right? That's the way freedom is. We're not going to back down from exploration. We love being free. That's what America's all about. He's using that buzzword freedom to elicit that response in his audience. Of course, we love freedom. We're going to keep going with the space exploration, even though it sucks today, even though this was a terrible tragedy. Then he continues. Let's keep reading. We'll continue our quest in space. Let me read that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 words. We'll continue our quest in space. Short, sweet, to the point. We, us as a country, we're in this together. And he doesn't say we should. He doesn't say maybe we should think about. You should think this is important because. He just says this is what's going to happen. He's very clear about where we're headed. Let's keep reading. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews. And yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue. So he's alluding to the tragedy that happened with these people in space who died. He doesn't name the Challenger crew specifically here, but obviously that's what everyone's thinking of. But he doubles down on the United States commitment to space exploration. It is not ambiguous here. It is clear. As a president, he's in charge, right? He's saying, this is what we are going to do. This is our mission. If he just did that without doing the last 2 slides, it would seem out of place. If he did this at the beginning of the speech, people would be angry. Everything shifts for a reason. This is where he wanted to get. He wanted to not only mourn with the public, but make sure everyone's on the same page. This tragedy changes nothing. It only lights our passion and drive to do this right and keep exploring. This changes nothing. All right, let's keep reading. I want to add that I wish I could talk to every man and woman who works for NASA or who worked on this mission. So again, he never gets too far from the Challenger explosion. Okay, that might be some tension. Let's move on. That might make you uncomfortable. Maybe you don't agree with him. He doesn't give you a chance to really question him here, does he? Let's go back to the mission, he's thinking. So I want to talk to everyone in this mission and tell them. So at the quote, your dedication and professionalism have moved and impressed us for decades, and we know of your anguish. We share it. I'm really focusing on those pronouns today. Us, we. Again, he's talking on behalf of the American public. He knows, again, they want to be able to do something. So it's okay, there were 7 heroes who died. There's also a lot of heroes who are still alive who I want to talk to as well. He's also reminded the audience that NASA consists of those heroes, and he's speaking to them on behalf of the audience. Continue. This is kind of a little random tangent here that seems random at first read. Let's really look at it. There's a coincidence today. On this day, 390 years ago, the great explorer Sir Francis Drake died aboard ship off the coast of Panama. In his lifetime, the great frontiers were the oceans. And a historian later said, he lived by the sea, died on it, and was buried in it. Well, today, we can say of the Challenger crew, their dedication was, like Drake's, complete. So a couple things. First, obviously, he's comparing space exploration to oceanic exploration. But he's also, again, yo-yoing back. He's not going too far. The attention of the audience is on the Challenger crew. That's where he's refocusing us here. I just want you to think about everyone in the audience in 1986, even if they're in school, grew up studying oceanic exploration. They're the ones who, they're people like Sir Francis Drake who made the history books. They were heroes, right? Obviously, there's some controversy around maybe some of their methods, but at the end of the day, they are part of history. And generally speaking, we revere them. We set them up on a pedestal. His audience in 1986 certainly does that. So he just is saying, hey, the historians that you read about or who wrote about the people who studied and explored the oceans and found new lands, etc., who you read about in school, that's who your children will be reading. The Challenger crew is the equivalent. That's who your children will be reading about in the future. We are living in history. That's what he wants his audience to think about. You read about history. You read about people who studied, or I'm sorry, like traveled and explored the oceans. Guess what? Your kids, your grandkids, they're going to be studying space explorers. He's putting it into context, and he's just kind of magnifying the importance of not just what happened today and the heroes that died, but space exploration in the future. Think about 390 years ago, how the world was so different. 390 years ago from 1986. Like, obviously, the world in 1986 is very different. It's a lot more established in terms of like different societies, different exploration led to more advancements, etc. He's just getting the audience to think about, what is the world going to be like in 390 years from today? What is space exploration going to be like? And what are people 390 years from now going to be thinking about? Not just the Challenger explosion, but like our place in the space, the exploration of space. All right, so once he does that, he's back and focusing on, the Challenger crew, and this is how he ends his speech. The crew of the space shuttle Challenger honored us by the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, then slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. Clearly, he ends there very deliberately, to touch the face of God. He's being emotional here. He's talking to his audience, who in 1986, the majority of people in America would consider themselves Christian. So he's talking, kind of speaking their language. He's trying to continue to align his values with theirs. Think about it this way, though. I said at the beginning, the best thinkers. Today's all a thinking day. Next week, we're going to start translating this into writing. The best thinkers think, how does the writer start and why? Why does he shift where he goes and why? And why does he end how he ends? So he's ending his speech where he starts his speech, honoring the astronauts who died. Higher level thinkers are going to be thinking this. And everyone can be a higher level thinker, it just takes practice. What I don't want you to hear from me when I say higher level thinkers is, oh, that's me, or oh, that's not me. That's the bar I want to get to. We can all be higher level thinkers. He sandwiches his commitment to further space exploration with the honoring of astronauts. Again, he doesn't give his audience the time to say, I agree with Reagan, and I disagree with Reagan, because he knows he's got them where he wants them. And I don't mean that to belittle, I think Reagan certainly feels the weight of the tragedy. He's not using this tragedy to manipulate his audience. He's meeting his audience where they are, and he's taking the advantage to kind of like make sure they're still on the same page with something they might not all be unified in. And obviously it's very related to the future of space exploration. So he sandwiches this commitment to further space exploration with what he knows the audience agrees with him. This is a day of tragedy and a day of mourning. That's how he begins. He ends. We honor the astronauts. He doesn't give them room to, of course they're not going to disagree with any of that. Where they might disagree is, or might get a little political, is should the country still go all out with space exploration? He says yes. He makes it pretty clear that's where they stand. He doesn't give the audience a chance to even really think about, is he right or is he wrong? Because they've been on his side. They agree with him. Again, Democrat or Republican, they're all going to say, of course we need to mourn. And of course these astronauts were heroes. And of course this was a tragedy. So they're going to agree with most of what he's writing or delivering. He's just kind of slipping in, I think very deliberately in the middle, the recommitment to space exploration. Okay, all of these things I want you thinking as you're writing. Now, as you're reading, because obviously you'll be reading with the text in front of you, annotate kind of your analytical thoughts on the side. And again, where we'll go in a couple weeks is focusing on big picture trends. I talked about a lot more today than I have time to write about in a 40-minute essay, right? So I'm thinking all these thoughts. I'm thinking all these great high-level analytical thoughts. But then I'm translating them into writing. I only have 40 minutes, so I'm only talking about the most important things Reagan's doing. So that's where we're going to be headed in a couple weeks. For today, here's some final reminders. One, as you read an argument, always consider how the audience would respond. That's everything we did today. Always consider how the audience respond here. Is the author reinforcing something the audience already believes? Or is the author deliberately getting them to shift to his or her perspective? What's the goal of the author, and how is the author trying to get his audience on his side? And second, this is just kind of a foreshadowing of where we're going to be headed in the next few weeks. I'm just going to talk straight to y'all. A lot of students think that this is harder than it is, because a lot of students think, and even if you got the AP Ultimate Guide, we have terminology on there. We have rhetorical terms. So a lot of students think because they see those terms and they see them in maybe some old multiple choice questions and maybe in the classroom. A lot of students think that this is about terminology, about let me find a really impressive term, and I can match it to line 3. Let me find anaphora. Martin Luther King uses anaphora. Ronald Reagan uses anaphora. Guys, that's true. That's not the point of this. So you can use those fancy terms, but if you think that's the point of this, you're falling short. And I'm going to talk straight. We're going to talk in future weeks about what 4s look like. I'm talking on the 1 to 9 scale of a rhetorical analysis essay. What 4s look like, what 6s and higher look like. I want you all in the 6s and higher. That's the whole point of being here, right? We're going to talk very straight to one another, and you just ask me questions, and we'll make sure you're on the same page with me. This is not about terminology. This is not about, if I never use a fancy AP term, I can get a 9. It's all about critical thinking like we thought about today. That's why I started here. This is not about plugging and placing and matching terms. This is about reading a text, reading an argument from an author, and thinking, how is the argument being developed to get the audience on the author's side? Simple as that. I'm thinking at a high level here. Okay, real quick, and we'll kind of wrap up. Again, we are doing a deep dive in rhetorical analysis all month. So please make sure we are looking all month long. Now, what I would like to do is make sure you guys have any questions. So if any questions come in after the chat, I will address them next week. I want to make this as practical and as useful for you as possible. So just make sure that's coming in, and I know that's a lot of me talking at you today, but the whole point of this is that we're working together towards the same goals. So we have the next few weeks. I'm deliberately starting. So the last couple of weeks we looked at multiple choice. Those are some good ones to go back to if you missed. But the next few weeks, I'm deliberately starting with what most people say is the hardest of the 3 essays. We have argumentation. We'll talk about that this year for sure. We have synthesis. We'll get there. But I want to start with the hardest one with most of our students. And honestly, I think by the end of October, you'll say, why does everyone say this is so hard? We got this. If you can read at a high level, if you can understand the text, and identify how the author communicates his or her message, you've got this. It's not about plugging and placing strategies. It's about thinking through the rhetorical situation, the rhetorical triangle, and then just translating it into writing. All right, so that's about it for today. Next week, we will continue to look at the challenger speech, but we're going to do more of a shotgun approach, rapid fire. Here's a prompt. Here's a thesis. We're not going to spend as much time next week like slogging through a text. I think there's value and there's place for that. AP Lang isn't I don't have like a ton of magic tricks. It's just all about practicing the right way and knowing what to do. Now, with that said, we'll have a few prompts next week. What does a good thesis statement look like? Maybe we should take some time looking at what does a mediocre thesis statement look like? How are we going to avoid mediocrity and get to excellence? In the meantime, if you have any questions, pop them into the chat. And again, at the beginning of maybe next week's chat, even before we go live, feel free to ask any questions that you want in the chat or the Ask a Question tab at the bottom. All right, until then, I hope that you all continue to take part in this all year. I'm really appreciative of you being here from the get-go, because I know a lot of people are going to want to come in April and May, and I'll be able to help them, but I'll be able to help you all a lot more as we walk through and we're interactive and really thinking about this the right way. This is a marathon, not a sprint. All right, everyone, have a great night until we meet again.